We're going to get started here. I'm going to call this meeting to order of the October 15th, 2024 meeting of the MFC Finfish Advisory Committee. The first order of business we have is a vote on the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion for that, or does anybody have any changes that they would like to make? Everybody good with the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Scott, I have a motion by Scott. Whitley, my apologies. So, I think we're going to do after we'll do this with an introduction real fast, if you don't mind. Do I have a second for that motion? Second, thank you. Is there any dissension? Do we have any dissension to the motion? Seeing none, motion passes by consent. Second board of approval, we have approval of the minutes from the January 16th, 2024 meeting. I'm sure all of you have gotten a chance to look at that. If anybody has any questions, I'm stating now. Otherwise, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from January 16th, 2024. I've got a motion for that.
Motion to approve.
Thank you. Do I have a second for that? Is there any dissension to that motion? Seeing none, motion is approved by consensus. Just real quick here, since we don't have name tags, something I'm used to, I just want to go around real quick and have everybody introduce themselves and just say a real brief thing about what they do. We start here at the end of the table.
Lewis Dunn from Raleigh. So.
Larry Lord, Carteret County, retired last year. Not a whole lot of anybody.
I'm Tom Roller. I'm a Marine Fisheries Commission member. I'm a full-time charter captain my other time. So,
Brady Proctor, Carteret County, retired recreational fisherman.
Scott Whitley, Pitt County, in the logging business. Used to be a guide years ago.
Brent Fulcher, Craven and Carteret County business owner, supporting over 200 independent fishermen, and also chairman of North Carolina Fisheries. Bill Tarpley, retired, Arapahoe, North Carolina.
that's it. All right. So the next first item of business we have is a presentation of the draft spotted sea trout fisheries management plan amendment 1. And I'm going to hand this over to staff to that. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Fulcher.
Do we have a forum to be able to vote?
We have 7 members, correct? So we do have a quorum. Yeah, thank you. Should have stated that on my apologies.
Okay. So good evening, committee members. We would really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight and review Amendment 1 to the Spotted Sea Trout Fishery Management Plan. So I'm Lucas Pensinger. I'm a biologist out of the Morehead City office. I'll sit right back here behind us most of the time. And I'm a co-lead for the Spotted Sea Trout FMP. So up here with me is Melinda Lambert. She's a biologist out of the Manual office, and she's the other co-lead for this FMP. So our presentation today will focus on reviewing Amendment 1, the draft of Amendment 1. And then after the presentation, we'll be happy to answer any questions that you all might have. And then ultimately, your action item tonight is for the advisory committee to vote on management recommendations to deliver to the Marine Fisheries Commission. And then Melinda and I will present any recommendations that y'all vote on here tonight to the commission at their November business meeting, where they are slated to select their preferred management option. All right. Might work. If not, Jesse will be in charge of advancing us. So first, before we get to that, I would like to just briefly review where we are in the fishery management plan process. So here we're looking at the timeline of the fishery management plan from that initial public scoping stage the whole way through the implementation of management strategies. So our current step is noted with that "we are here" sign pointing at that yellow chevron. I'm gonna promise you that you will probably get sick of hearing this tonight, but the Amendment 1 draft and the preliminary division management recommendations included in it are still in the drafting stage. So those preliminary recommendations are subject to change, based on the input that we hear from the public and from all of you. This is our third MFC Advisory Committee meeting. So the input that we've heard at the previous meetings and here tonight. So again, that action item today is for y'all to vote on any recommendation, management recommendations you have to send to the Marine Fisheries Commission. And then at their November meeting, they will hear all those recommendations, review public and advisory committee input, and then vote on their preferred management. Ahead of me before I can even push the button. So before we get to that action item, though, we'll start by reviewing the structure of Amendment 1, and then we'll cover what's contained and discussed within each of the major sections of that. I don't know if that was you or me, but we got there. So then we'll review each section of the amendment, starting with the base plan, then an overview of the information and issue papers, the division's preliminary management recommendations, and then we'll finish up just by briefly reviewing the timeline of Amendment 1 moving forward. So the base plan provides a lot of the background information on Amendment 1. It includes things like the goal and objectives. I'm advancing myself too far now. Includes things like the goal and objectives of the plan, spotted sea trout life history, the management unit that the plan covers, characterization of the recreational commercial fisheries, a summary of the 2020 spotted sea trout stock assessment and stock status. So we will very briefly cover all of those today, but they're all covered in a whole lot more detail in the base plan. So the Commission approved the goal and objectives of Amendment 1 at their May 2023 business meeting. The goal of this plan is to manage the spotted sea trout fishery to maintain a self-sustaining population that provides sustainable harvest based on science-based decision-making processes. The management unit for the fishery management plan includes all spotted sea trout within coastal and joint fishing waters of North Carolina. So spotted sea trout are distributed pretty much coast-wide in North Carolina. They're found everywhere from the rivers, sounds, and marshes to the ocean. And while they generally reside in estuarine waters for their entire life cycle, they do have some seasonal migration patterns. So in the winter, they tend to move south and aggregate in the creeks and bays of the upper estuary. And then in spring and summer, they move north again and spread out into the rivers and sounds. The spotted sea trout fishery in North Carolina is predominantly a recreational fishery. So here we're looking at recreational and commercial landings from biological years 1991 through 2023. Biological year runs from March through February of the following year. So for example, biological year 2023 would be from March of 2023 through February of 2024. The height of each of these bars is total landings in that year. And the purple portion of the bar is recreational landings, and that yellow portion of the bar is commercial landings. So since current management was fully put into place in 2012, recreational harvest has accounted for about 86% of total harvest, and commercial harvest has accounted for about the other 14%. Landings in both sectors are pretty variable year to year, but generally the trend, especially for recreational landings, has been an increase throughout the time series, with some periods of very low harvest in both sectors following cold storms. So these red arrows are showing the years the director closed the spotted sea trout fishery due to a cold storm. Landings in both sectors increased pretty dramatically in 2019 and then remained high through 2022. In 2023, however, we did see recreational landings decrease sharply. Commercial landings also decreased in 2023, although that drop was not quite as steep as what we saw recreational. It's hard to say exactly why landings were down last year, because it's really unlikely that that drop was due to any one specific reason. So on this graph, we've just pulled out specifically recreational landings, and we're showing the average percent of recreational landings each month since 2012, which again just represents that current management period. Recreational harvest occurs year-round, although most of that harvest occurs in the lake area. So there might be some minor differences in these patterns regionally, but they're pretty broadly consistent across the entire state. approximately 70% of recreational harvest occurs in that peak from October through February, so in that peak season. There is a small bump in landings that we see in June and July, and that's likely due to tourism and vacationing activities. So on this next one, we're seeing the same graph, except now we pulled out commercial harvest. So the graph is showing same thing, percent of commercial landings by month, and for that same time period of current management since 2012. So similar to the recreational fishery, we see that large peak in landings in the fall, and it extends into the winter. So about 71% of commercially harvested spotted sea trout, or commercial spotted sea trout harvest, occurs in those fall months into winter. Harvest of spotted sea trout does remain higher in the colder months as fish aggregate in the smaller water bodies where they overwinter and can potentially be landed in larger numbers. And then harvest tends to decline again as waters warm and fish disperse. So on this next graph, we're just showing the portion of commercial landings by year type, each biological year. The color of the bar corresponds to the year type. So historically, anchored gill nets, which are the light blue portion at the bottom of each bar, were the predominant gear used in the fishery. But in more recent years, we see runaround gill nets, which are that gray portion up towards the top of the bar. We see that runaround gill nets have become the most common gear. And you can see that trend as you move from left to right on the graph. As the blue portion of the bars representing anchored gill nets gets smaller, and that gray portion of the bars for runaround gill nets gets larger. And you will notice maybe on the bottom there in 2016 and 18, there's a single asterisk. In 2022, there's a double asterisk. The single asterisks are just showing years that the beach seine landings are combined with other years. And then that double asterisk is showing when beach seine and haul landings were combined in other years. And that's just because there aren't very many participants in those two fisheries, and data is confidential in those years. So some of you are probably sick of hearing me talk about this. If you're not, you might be by the end of the night. I did want to briefly remind everyone of the stock status of spotted sea trout. I'll start with whether or not the stock is overfished. So in the final year of the stock assessment, spawning stock biomass, or SSB, was well above threshold SSB, which means that the spotted sea trout stock is not overfished. So in other words, in that final year, there were plenty of mature female fish available to sustain the population. However, this graph shows the overfishing status of spotted sea trout. The individual points on the graph are the ratio of estimated fishing mortality, or F, to the 20% F threshold. So F is the rate at which fishing activities are removing fish from the population. And that solid black line at 1 is that maximum ratio where fishing mortality is sustainable. So in other words, we want to see points that are below that line. But if we focus in on that final year of the stock assessment, the ratio is above the black line, which means that overfishing is occurring. So long story short, plenty of biomass to sustain the spotted sea trout fishery, but we're fishing them at too high of a rate. So that rate at which we're fishing them is unsustainable. To keep spotted sea trout biomass at levels that support the great fishery we've had in recent years, we need to end overfishing by reducing fishing mortality. And for the rest of today's presentation, we'll focus on the appendices of Amendment 1, which include discussions of management options to end overfishing, as well as discussions of supporting information and other options that might benefit the stock. So I'll start with Appendix 1, and that's an information paper which characterizes the small mesh gill net fishery or the small mesh gill net spotted sea trout fishery. So at their August 2021 business meeting, the Marine Fisheries Commission passed a motion to not initiate rulemaking on small mesh gill nets, but rather refer the issue through the FMP process for each species, and for any issues or rules coming out of species-specific fishery management plans to be addressed at that time. So in North Carolina, as I mentioned previously, small mesh gill nets are the predominant gear used to harvest spotted sea trout. So per direction from the commission, small mesh gill nets must be addressed during review of spotted sea trout FMP. So the information paper presents details to guide potential management measures discussed in the sustainable harvest issue paper, which includes things like how mesh size restrictions, trip limits, and yardage restrictions could be expected to impact spotted sea trout harvest, and bycatch in both the spotted sea trout small mesh fishery, but also in other small mesh fisheries that harvest spotted sea trout incidentally. So the best example of both of those is striped mullet. Especially in the fall, the striped mullet are the primary incidental catch in the spotted sea trout small mesh fishery, and spotted sea trout are the primary incidental catch in the striped mullet small mesh fishery. So the information paper also discusses ways to mitigate user conflict to the greatest extent possible. And just to give a quick example of how this information paper can inform sustainable harvest, the figure that we're looking at up here on the right is showing the.
Lucas?
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
I'm sorry to do this. I hate to do this, and everybody's traveled far to talk about this topic. But the meeting is adjourned, and we will reschedule something to get back together, at another time. So my apologies to the group. I spoke to the chairman, and that were instructions, so that's what we're gonna do. And we will reschedule this meeting before, the, November commission meeting. So thank y'all for coming, and I'm sorry about the event. Sorry.
Why is it
Sorry.
adjourned? What are we adjourning?
Sam, it's chairman of MFC's call.
Yeah.
Okay.
Meeting
We have to abide by what chairman Porter says.
Sorry about that.